it's a pretty radical thing to be like 40 hours a week is too much for a human to work. Like that is like a really, really scary thing to say in our society or to think. And I think receives like a lot of disapproval from a lot of people because we've been conditioned that way. And so it feels like an incredible like entitlement almost. Like, how dare I think that like I deserve to work less than 40 hours a week. And so like, yeah, I guess in that sense, like I just kind of have to like hold all of those thoughts at bay, the thoughts of other people, just the thoughts of the culture, the thoughts of former me, you know? And so yeah, it does take like,
which is also a type of severance.
Courage. Yeah, true. Yeah, true. So anyway, yeah, I guess in that sense, I'm like proud, but also just, yeah, it's just kind of like a constant battle to push that away at this point.
Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the Stoner Story Witch again.
Glad to be back.
I really want to have you on to like bookend this like Severance season. Because it just felt important to circle back. And I think my goal for today's episode is to reflect on, like, since we first watched Severance last May, perhaps, or since we just kind of opened it up and did our very first episode back in October, how was Severance alive? Or like what synchronicities was like the universe kind of like sprinkling around, or like what connections were we making like to kind of our own life? Because I think that was a big part of just even this whole Severance season in the first place, is like just remembering that like it was born of our friendship and you being like, there is this story, I want you to engage in this story so that we can, I mean, you did not say these words, but realizing to me like what an intimate bid for connection it feels like when somebody's like, I watched this thing and I think you would like it. Or is it I watched this thing and I feel like you're going to see me so much more clearly if you watch this episode, or I'm curious what your takeaways will be. And really wanting to like make space for that, and also wanting to like invite other people into the conversation too. So like, I think I kind of want to, you know, like if this season was a bracelet and every episode was its own bead, like kind of be like, okay, like what, as of right now anyway, like what is like my takeaway from my episode with you, my episode with Kevin, my episode with Carmen, my episode with Burju, my episode with John, and, you know, like just kind of then what is it that I'm kind of like walking away with? And certainly like I called you in, like I did this season because, you know, you're my best friend. You recommended it. It resonated deeply for both of us. And it was like, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
And so I want to open it up for you too, to kind of ask those questions. Okay, so we can start off with, because I know this was something we were just chatting a little bit about, with just like acknowledging that you and I have had other conversations that we haven't pressed record on. Like, I feel like, you know, we have bonded and connected a lot over these last several weeks, and just, you know, unrecorded conversations that we've had in a more personal way. And just clarifying that, like, we are friends that have conversations that we are purposefully not putting into the public sphere of this podcast. And so, like, while there were definitely some like really juicy synchronicities that we could talk about, like, it feels important that certain things remain private. But another thing that we talked about, because we are in this, it also just feels like a really liminal time, since it is like the last days of 2024. And so, we're like in this, like, you know, Christmas to New Year and like end of the Severance season, and like what's on the horizon for the Stoner Story Witch. But we were talking a little bit a while back about like right around Christmas. Do you want to talk about your Santa
Yes.
story and the connections you're making?
I made a great Santa Severance connection, and Kristyn helped me out with it. Um, yeah, so basically, I recently went to a party, Christmas party, with some friends, in which there was a meeting of Santa present, and I'm not a person with kids, but I do delight in like the rare occasions that I do get to hang out with kids, such as this. It was a very sweet party with, delightful friends. But one thing that I noticed about the Santa encounters, um, was just that there was a lot of focus on children being good. And there was a lot of talk from Santa, about children, have you been good this year? It's really important that you're good. Are you on the naughty or nice list?
Mm-hmm.
I know you and I talked a little bit about the naughty and nice list and how we are not fans of that, but yeah, it just struck me that like all this talk of being good, I think really translates to like children being obedient, which
Mm-hmm.
the more we think about it, is like not always a good thing, I would say. And I think there can be kind of like, it can feel a little bit threatening perhaps to like just always have this like idea of goodness hanging over children. At one point, there was even a little boy who, like, in all this talk of goodness, was like, "Tell me what I should do, Santa," or like something like that. It was like,
How
I mean,
high?
yeah. Tell me how high to jump. And it was just like, I mean, it was hilarious and sweet and endearing, but also like, man, like great question, buddy, because like you are just trying to follow the rules and like do what these adults are telling you to do so that you can be good. Like they're saying, but it's like you don't really know what that entails necessarily. And like it just like somewhat made me think of like high demand, disorganized attachment fields and like Santa as cult and like
Mm-hmm.
um so the connection to Severance that you helped me out with too is like it very much reminded us of when Mark is talking about Milchek to
Mm-hmm.
Helly, and I believe he says, it's like, oh yeah, or I think she's like, Milchek seems nice, and Mark is like, yeah, Milchek's great, but he can't always be that nice, or something like that. It's sort of
Yeah.
like the weaponized like niceness of Santa. Like Santa is
Mm-hmm.
so warm and welcoming, but also like don't be bad, otherwise I might not be this
Mm-hmm.
nice and I'll
Yep.
only bring you coal.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I thought that was quite funny, but also just a little bit of insight in how we can maybe think more deeply about Santa.
Yeah, like we are teaching our kids to like embody this like yeah, I mean there's just so many things that are just like wrong with the idea that like how do people even celebrate Christmas? There's so much conversation to be had around this, but at a bare
Yeah.
minimum you're teaching shame, you're teaching this like blind obedience, you're teaching that there's this like authority figure, and then there's also this like elf on the shelf, which I don't know if you know about
Mm,
elf on the shelf, but that is the
I
original.
do.
We do not have one,
Hmm.
but I know it started as like fucking surveillance. Like he's gonna
Yeah.
like go up to the North Pole every night and report to Santa. But like the elf is also a little mischievous and it's kind of fun. At least that was like the original story, or that's how I remember it anyway. And I was like, that is terrifying to think that like for now the entire month you got a little narc on your shelf gonna
Yep.
fucking report you. Like it's like we're teaching uh self like this like self-policing, like it's like if I
Yeah.
want to be like an abolitionist, like it starts with this whole like idea that like we are like I've put the kibosh every time my kids like would watch a movie and then talk about the nice and naughty list. I was like, all kids are good kids.
Yeah.
Like even kids that like quote unquote do naughty things. Like
Yeah.
it's like all feelings are welcome and like not all behaviors are, and like that's our job, is like to teach, not to discipline, not to punish.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Well, I thought it was interesting that you were saying that your kids were kind of using that against each other
oh
too.
yeah,
Where
yeah,
it
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
oh, like, hey, you're on the naughty list. And it's like this kind
Yep.
of idea that they start to self-police.
Absolutely. And we see that in Severance too, right? Like,
Yeah.
ooh, I gotta
Yeah.
like keep you in line, or you like don't get us in trouble, or anyway. So yeah, it's like I am sure that if I spent more time on the memes, there would be so many like Milchek in like a Santa hat because he is like yeah, because he is this like this Santa presence. So anyway, so that Severance through the seasons,
Through the
and it's just
seasons.
like
Yeah.
yeah, like that was not a takeaway we had back in May. But
Right.
as we're like doing the Severance, and I'm just like, oh my God, it is everywhere. And it's like, oh, like Severance is real life. Like
Yep.
it's reflecting reality back at us. Go into a little bit, like you actually do have some like pretty Severance-y things that you are willing to talk about, and one of them being around like just on a very like very broad brush, we could just say that Severance is about like the struggle of finding a work-life balance or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, and this has kind of this like season has been kind of an interesting one for you in that regard. So you want to share a little bit about what that's been like for you?
Yeah. So last time we recorded, it was almost exactly 2 months ago, I guess, like end of October. And for me, that was like the very end, or shortly after my very busy work season, harvest season. I work in an agricultural field that from like August to October is just completely takes over my life. And thought of it as like, well, recently thought of it as like somewhat of a severance or an underworld journey of sorts. Like there's just all I do is work and sleep and work and sleep and
Yeah.
very, very few days off and all that good stuff. And basically, I've been doing this for 10 years now. And at the end of every harvest, it kind of is just this like, well, there is a reintegration period for sure. Like November and
Mm,
December every year is my time to rest and recover and like remember that I'm a person who has interests and hobbies and
yeah.
energy. And um, I think this year, for whatever reason, it just like every year it feels like it gets a little harder. And it's like, oh, I have to go back to just like 40 hours a week now. Like there's just not really
Mm,
a real reprieve from this really intense work period. And so, um, for years I've been somewhat, kind of daydreaming about kind of trying to take more time off in the off season, perhaps in our slower seasons. And this year I finally kind of just made it happen. So yeah, I mean, it's like in an ideal world, it's like maybe I would love to work like 20 hours a week, but like that didn't necessarily feel realistic.
right.
And for many reasons. But what I was kind of able to figure out is just I would love to take some Fridays off. Like I would love to take every Friday off. That also didn't really feel realistic. And so I kind of like kept winnowing it down to like what feels realistic, but also good for me. And essentially, I think I'm going to use some of my, or like all of my PTO to take some Fridays off next year, have a bunch of long weekends, potentially even take some like unpaid time off around the holidays, because that sort of feels easier to do just with the way the culture of my workplace is. And yeah, I was able to like ask my boss and see how he felt about all this. And I really did not go into the details because I didn't, um, you know, I think there is just definitely a fear there always of being
Hmm.
thought of as lazy or like not a team player at work, or
Yep.
that if I'm not working enough hours, maybe they don't want to give me health insurance or like,
Mm.
any of these concerns. And so I didn't go into the details too much, but I asked basically if I can just like use my PTO to take a bunch of Fridays off. And it's like, well, they can't really say no to that. And they were honestly very supportive. So
Mm-hmm.
that is what I'm doing. And yeah, so that is kind of my attempts to like take back some of my time in the small ways that I can. So I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, and I loved what you were saying, like helping you like like November and December about like remembering yourself and like you
Yeah.
have hobbies, you have this other person. It's like the nature of your work or the severance that your survival in capitalism requires is
Yeah.
like you lose yourself for
Hmm.
like a quarter of the year to this. And
Yeah.
it's not just work you're doing, like you have no outie. I mean, your innie
Yeah.
gets to like eat dinner and sleep in a bed, but like that's literally it, like
Yeah.
um and yeah, kind of being like, okay, no, like I want to have like some pockets where I can really like at least it sounds to me like some intentional time um to yeah, like pursue hobbies or other interests or just like kind of have like that regular time and bring
Yeah.
some ease throughout the year. The other thing I think is really interesting about that too, which you kind of named, is like how hard it is to ask, right? And like we
Yeah.
see that
Yeah.
we like it's like we see that with certainly Miss Cobell, who's like the
Yep.
like absolutely like the personification the of like that scary workplace environment. You're not going to want to be asking,
Yeah.
and so it's like, regardless of who your actual boss is, your conditioned response to asking for some ease, asking for more time, asking for some balance in
Yeah.
your life from
Yeah.
like from just somebody who has enough power over you in these capitalist systems that they could be taking away your insurance. They could be like deciding that, hey, actually, we don't even really need you. Maybe we'll just fire you. Or you know what I mean? Like,
Yep. Yep.
and like regard like, and that's the thing with fear is like it doesn't even have to be probable. Like you can even just be like, I don't even like
Yeah.
the probability of this I know is so
Yeah. I don't actually think I'm
outrageously
gonna get
low.
fired, but like there still is that fear
It's
there, you
so
know? Yeah.
and yeah, and I know that I mean, because yeah, we've talked about like how unsustainable or like no, I shouldn't say unsustainable, but like just how hard it is, how hard it is to kind of like, come a certain month of the year, you like know it's around the, I think there's
Yeah.
like this rhythm to it too, where it's like, okay,
For
it's
sure.
like you got like the Sunday angsties, but it's not Sunday. It's like the entire
But it's
month of
for a whole
August,
season.
you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
and and yeah, like I just thought it was super cool that it was like during the Severance season that you were like, fuck it, like I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
And you did it.
I did
Hooray,
it.
gold star. It went well. Like,
I think it's also, the me of a few years ago, let's say, when I had not like learned and studied about capitalism and human nervous systems and just like a lot of the stuff that
mm,
I've been, learning more about the last few years, like I think it's a pretty radical thing to be like 40 hours a week is too much for a human to work. Like
hmm
that is like a really, really scary thing to say in our
yeah,
society or to think. Um, and I think receives like a lot of disapproval from a lot of people because we've been conditioned that
yep.
way. And so it feels like an incredible like entitlement almost. Like how dare I think that like I deserve
Oh yeah.
to work less than 40 hours a week. And so like yeah, I guess in that sense, like I just kind of have to like hold all of those thoughts at bay, the thoughts of other
hmm
people, just the thoughts of the culture, the thoughts of former me, And
Yeah.
so yeah, it does take
Which is
like
also a type of
it does take a
severance.
lot of courage. Yeah, true. Yeah, true. Um so anyway, yeah, I guess in that sense I'm like proud, but also just yeah, it's just kind of like a constant battle to like to push that away at this point.
Totally, totally. I mean, I remember when I was still teaching, I remember learning from Carmen that she just like made an offhanded comment. So many of the things she says are offhand, and then now I realize like I've
Yeah,
just taken so many classes with her that now her offhanded comments are my offhanded comments.
totally. Yeah.
So brain glucose. She's like, we only have
Yeah.
3 hours of brain glucose every day for like critical thinking tasks. And I
Yeah.
was just like, I'm sorry, what now?
I'm
Like,
sorry, what?
and it's like, yeah, I mean, she's like, you could potentially replenish some of that with like a really good meal or a nap or a rest, but like pretty much like a human capacity of critical thinking is about 3 hours a day of brain glucose. And she's like, that's why a lot of times, you have a lot of rhythms that kind of carry, you go to work and you have like, maybe you have compassionate systems that you can kind of employ where it's just like, okay, like I don't even have to think about going the rounds and doing this thing, or like you automate, maybe is a way of
Sure.
saying it.
Yeah.
So like it's maybe not, maybe a lot of the work we do isn't critical thinking. And so like that's one way that maybe like capitalist paradigms could be like, well, but actually when you think like a lot of the work you do isn't really critical thinking. But when I think of as a
Yeah.
teacher and like 7 periods in a day,
Oh
and
my
the
gosh. Yeah.
teachers are expected to like really want their students to be doing critical thinking in all their subject. Maybe they have a study hall, maybe they have, like a movement or something like that. So maybe they only have like 5 core classes, but still, I mean, like that's then 5 hours. And then there's probably homework. And then there's probably also a lot of social stuff going on because they're fucking teenagers. And like so much of their critical thinking capacity is just going to be into like, oh my gosh, like, so whatever, like whatever very real drama is going on in these people's lives, whether
Yeah.
it's, with just friends or family or whatever. And it's just like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I
Yeah.
I like and this was also, I mean, I quit before we like did away with masking, and like as a science teacher it still is baffling to me that anyway, well, it makes sense to me when you understand how capitalism works that we're not
Right.
wearing masks. Um but from a science perspective it is just boggling. Um Okay. Yeah. I just need to take a second there because I was just like, oh, propaganda is also very severance.
Yeah.
Mm. Uh, but yeah, so like that was definitely a moment for me where I'm like, okay, I am the Milchek, or I am the Cobell. I am over demanding from like nervous systems that just like don't have the capacity for this. And then certainly like then from my end as a worker, it was just like, well, how fucking dare I? What right do I have to step out of the workforce? Um,
Yep.
yeah, that is just some real grappling, and I am with you 100%. Like it's a radical thing to be like, yeah, like I get that I'm lucky. I get that I'm
Right.
fortunate. I get that I get to partake in a level of ease that is just not available to most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how am I helping anyone else be free by me being stuck in this job for 40 hours or
Right. Yeah. Whatever it is.
yeah, by me not finding ease or rest or things that I want to
Right.
create or anyway, so I'm just proud of you. I think that's so cool.
Thanks.
Good job. Let's take a moment and chat about well, you had some thoughts on the Carmen episode because really
Yeah.
the purpose that I said of our first episode, we talked a little bit about like, who are you and what's our relationship and how we came about to do Severance, but then like a big function of having you on in the first episode was to kind of give a little pre-introduction into the world of secure attachment and contact nutrition and disorganized attachment specifically, so that Carmen and I could kind of go down like a nitty gritty
Yeah.
and not necessarily need to make so many severance connections. So my hope was that our episode and Carmen's episode would kind of be partnered in that way. So um I I want to hear, yeah, what were your thoughts when you were like hearing her, or what were some of the like takeaways or connections or other breadcrumbs in the wild that you were noticing?
Yeah, so many, to be honest. I really loved that episode. She just has so many fantastic things to say. I think so the first bit that really struck me is when she was kind of defining high demand groups and like some of the characteristics of a high demand group. And because I happened to be watching a season of Love Island during that
Mm.
time, I immediately thought of Love Island in particular and kind of also reality TV in general, and just how many of the characteristics of high demand groups that she was listing are present in the Love Island household,
Oh,
shall we
yeah.
say. And I think you and I are probably gonna do like we could do a whole episode on that, and maybe we will. So,
Easily. I've
so
been I've
I
been begging you if we could do
yeah,
a Love Island related
you have
episode.
like more on this than I do. And so, yeah, we have a lot we could say about that. But it's a lot of like just the arbitrary rules, the sort of like policing from above, which then turns into self-policing, a lot of like needing or like sort of being conditioned to only have external like external validation
Hmm.
or like kind of losing your self efficacy and your
Right.
autonomy and your preferences and all of that. Um, anyway, I won't say too much on that, but
Yeah,
very,
no,
very good.
I know, like, because I hear you say this, and because I have been like, oh my gosh, Jamie, we need to do an episode. We need to do an episode on Love Island and secure attachment, and like, I already jotted down notes, and I was
Yep.
like, I just need somebody to like talk with me. I thought that I was going to do a offshoot episode about some reality show, maybe Love Island, maybe but I was like, there was a lot of reality TV that was feeling really like bubbling and fizzing in October. So
Yeah.
my guess was that I ended up doing Subversive Smut, which also was really great.
Yeah.
Um, but because you left me a voice memo saying like, okay,
Yeah.
so I listened to Carmen's episode and it was really good, and I also happen to be watching Love Island, and I get what you were saying, and I think I would be ready to have that conversation with you sometime. And like, I just remember like I was just my like fists were like pumping in the air like a celebratory like yeah like oh she finally like, and not that like I had to like convince or coerce you or whatever. I just now I was thinking about how, so much of that validation comes from the viewers, and the
Yeah.
viewers
Yeah.
are only getting what the producers are editing. So like that's fucked up. You can't even like really truly like ensure that your authentic self might not even be getting out to the viewers because the producers have
Right.
decided that they're going to give you the villain edit or
Yeah.
whatever. And so, and then you start, and then the viewers vote on different things throughout the seasons. And then there's games and challenges where like the viewers voted and these were their results, and like it really messes with people when they are, because yeah, they are severed from their friends and their families. They don't have phones, they don't have like, they can't access internet, they can't watch TV or movies, like they can't even
Yeah.
like listen to music, I don't think, like because of just
No,
they're
not at all.
constantly
No.
surveilled, and so
Yeah.
like copyright issues and whatever. But it's just like what a fucking isolating thing. And they literally will even say things like, oh, you're not the type of person I would usually go for on the outside.
Yeah.
Like they literally even have like, it's kind of acknowledged that these, like they are real people, like it's reality TV, but they are a cast of characters.
Yeah.
And like we are just like acknowledging that like this is an outside view of them. But then they're also totally subjecting themselves again, like fucking Severance, to social scorn. Because if you get that villain edit,
Yeah.
and like,
Yeah.
I mean, I take issue with, I mean, I know Love Island is doing other things to like not be litigated against, but I mean, like people have taken their lives after that show because of. Let's put a pin in it. I am so here for a deep dive into yeah, Love Island and other reality shows too, because I find that there are ones out there that I think do a better job than others. And
Yes.
I'm thinking of The Boyfriend and Love Village. Both are Japanese,
Oh,
I
I don't know The
believe.
Boyfriend, but I do
Oh,
remember
it's
Love Village.
so good. Um, oh my gosh, yeah. If you wanted to watch The Boyfriend, because it's all gay men, and there's this like
Mm.
and yeah, and there's like some really good like attachment dynamics. Like this one guy is very disorganized, and his partner is like
Oh,
so confused. Anyway, I
oh.
digress. It's very, very cute. Yeah. Shun and Die. Sorry, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for Japanese. Um,
Okay, this is my fear because what I remember of Love Village is that I got very bored very quickly. And so it's like my fear is that
oh,
the actual shows that are like doing attachment well, like don't make for as entertaining of viewing, which is why they
yeah.
make these like disorganized attachment situations because that is what creates quote unquote entertaining television.
Yeah, and I like them because they have like a Great British Bake Off quality to them that you
Yes,
also
right.
find boring. Because
I also
yeah,
find boring.
because it's like okay, so now I'm gonna just talk about Love Village for just 2 hot seconds.
Okay.
Because one thing is like they still have their phones, like they can still communicate with their family. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
still go to work, like they
True,
still are
true.
work, like they're not just totally stuck. And they also in The Boyfriend, they have a coffee truck that like two people like have to work at every day. And so like they
Okay.
all learn how to make coffee, and then like so every morning one person is like chosen to like be the shift lead, and then like they get to like choose who they want to work with. And so then it's just like, ooh, like who do you want to work with today? And but it's like you have this responsibility, like you're working together. You have like you're like it's cultivating this like shared rhythm that's like also just like like can we be a team and are we in service of something bigger, and then like the money that they make from that like then contributes to their income, which isn't much. Like they don't give them very much money to live off of, so they have to like budget their money. Like the whole house has to
Hmm.
budget, and one of the guys is like a bodybuilder, and so it's like a big deal that he needs to have like 2 chicken breasts every day because chicken is just like kind of expensive. And they were
Yeah.
like, so if he can have just like half the amount of chicken, and if he's okay with buying the cheap chicken, then like we can make like everybody's working together to make sure that his chicken is a priority. And I'm like, this is so lovely. I just love like this is like I want my nervous system to have practice like watching these people like being like like they're all living in this house anyway.
Yep.
um and yeah, Love Island, it's like they sorry, we could just go out. Maybe this is the Love Island episode, but like um they do have shared rhythm, certainly, but there's not like this sense of like we are a group and we need to be cohesive. Like we have to work together for a common goal. There's a lot of just volatility with, again, it's like us versus them in groups, and out the
Yeah.
boys versus
Yeah.
girls, or like the bombshells come in, and like there's just all sorts of like things that are meant to jack up your nervous system. Like
Yeah.
it is meant to trigger your abandonment wounds. It's meant to put you in a disorganized state. It's meant to bring
Yes.
up all your trauma responses because like that's good TV.
Yep.
Um and then I just also just sometimes notice that like if and again, like any other show, like me watching Severance, I watch Love Island because you and another close friend of ours from high school, well, it's because he watched it that he got us into it. And then now like
Yeah.
you're full, it's like if you guys stopped watching, I would stop. I would never watch a single ep.
Yeah.
I still might not
Yeah.
actually watch another ep. I after every season I'm like, I don't think I can put myself through that.
I know.
Uh uh, but if you record another podcast with me about it, then maybe I'll milk another
We'll
podcast.
do it.
But anyway, so I was really glad. That felt really validating for me that if nothing else, I had Carmen on the podcast to convince you to have another podcast episode with me where we could talk about Love Island.
I guess like the other big takeaway I had from Carmen's episode, it reminds me a lot of another person whose work I follow somewhat closely, who is Tia Levings. And she has a Substack. She's pretty active on Instagram. I believe her Substack is called The Anti-Fundamentalist.
And we can
Although
link
don't
to
quote
it
me
in
on that.
we'll link to it in the show
Yeah,
notes.
yeah. But essentially, she is kind of an ex-fundamentalist Christian who, escaped both an abusive marriage, but also kind of the abuse of fundamentalist religion, and just writes and says some really really profound things about that. And she talks a lot about how, kind of in defining fundamentalism, there's a couple characteristics, which is that kind of one, it's a set of instructions where it's like if you follow this exact set of instructions, this pathway, and if you do it perfectly, then you will get this result. And also, if you can't do that, if you don't get that result, then it's a problem with you. It's not a problem with the system. It's like you are not trying hard enough. You you must be missing something. You might need to like try a little harder in this area. And it kind of like sets you up for this just very slow escalation of purity of like, well, if this is good, then like just this little bit more is better and more pure, and like that will get you the set of results that you're looking for. And so anyway, that's why fundamentalism just can very slowly or very quickly escalate into like really 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 harmful, restrictive, abusive situations. And she talks about how she kind of, her shorthand for it is like the ideas of holding ideas over people, or valuing ideas over people. And yeah, just once again, that like fundamentalism leaves no room for individualism or like differences between people, or like people's different abilities and interests, and like back to the high demand group stuff, like any sense of autonomy or preference is like fully just taken away from you, and you are to follow the leader or the rules.
And there's like an implied us versus them, because like if you don't follow this, then like not only are you not trying hard enough, but then like you don't deserve to be in the Zen group.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's very much like a scary out group. Everyone else, in her situation, everyone like of the world, not godly, are just sinners and terrible and scary. And so why fundamentalism like very often becomes very isolating. They isolate themselves from out groups. Anyway, I think fundamentalism has been a special interest of mine for a long time, so I could probably talk about that for a while. The other thing that kind of came out of that is like, as I was listening to her describe fundamentalism, of course, I was reminded of Carmen's pod and Severance and all that, but I was also reminded of another deep interest of mine, which is diet culture, and the idea of well, in recent years, I've become very against diet culture. And like, there was a time in my life where I was very into wellness and nutrition, and kind of like, the idea of like optimizing your health, and like, it wasn't about like weight loss, but of course, for a lot of people it is. But anyway, just this kind of like perfectionist attitude towards health. And I've since, become, really come out of that and really leaned into anti-diet, body liberation, fat liberation spaces, and
intuitive eating.
So anyway, it just reminded me that like in some ways, diet culture is kind of a high demand group, because it gives you like a pathway of like, if you eat this way, if you exercise in this way, this many times, if you take these exact supplements, if you avoid these certain foods, like, then you will get the result you want.
Right.
And, nowadays it's kind of like uncool in some circles to be like trying to lose weight, so it's like they disguise it in this like, well, it's not necessarily about weight loss, but it's about health and longevity and energy and like whatever those things are. But it's like this pathway to perfection that very, very quickly can lead to extremely restrictive or disordered habits, just like putting you on this stair step towards a really bad place.
Yeah.
So anyway, diet culture as fundamentalism, diet culture as high demand group, that really resonated.
Yeah, yeah. I remember even thinking a little bit. I know we didn't say the words diet culture, but with like the no dinner party on Severance, like just
Yeah.
this and there could be lots of different like reasons why or symbolisms or whatever, but like from a very basic thing, it's just like, yeah, denying that we are humans, human bodies with bodily needs, denying like the bucket of secure attachment that we can gain from like ingestion behaviors and even like the shared
Yeah.
rhythm of all sitting together at a table and like sharing in like maybe whatever like culture of the food or just like
Yeah.
uh yeah.
I think you also said something in Carmen's pod. You had mentioned about like how they're planning for the kids' beds and like
Oh
kind of
yeah.
this idea of like cradling or like coddling your kids maybe to
Mm-hmm.
like just give them like the absolute best and like or I think you even mentioned like yeah, I'm gonna like uh like eat certain things or like do these certain little health habits and I'm just so worried about like buying organic produce that I like don't have time
Oh yeah.
to like grapple with the fact that like lumen exists or like in
Right.
our real world it's like I'm just really gonna like focus all my energy in removing every microplastic from my home, in which case I do not have like any brain glucose to like consider you know the social determinants of health or like that there's a
Right.
genocide going on or like literally anything else,
Right.
so
Right. No, exactly. Exactly. I think, and I don't think Carmen and I talked about this at all on our podcast. I'm going to have to refer. I think she has a whole episode on fascism, but I think she even talks about diet cultures. She maybe doesn't call it diet
yeah.
culture, but like the like granola to fasci pipeline of
Yes,
like,
yes, yes,
yeah, like this like
yes.
wellness
Yeah.
like just wanting to eat well, like Hitler was a vegetarian, like
Yeah.
just like this like because it's about the purity, and the purity can just get pretty eugenics pretty quick if you
Pretty
don't have some
quickly.
consciousness around it. And
Yes.
holy shit, like the politics are what they are. Severance is
Yes.
nonfiction.
Yes.
So yeah, but yeah, no, I like like the connections of uh, yeah, like the fundamentalist thinking and diet culture, and that really that yeah, at its core, it's this purity, it's this good and bad, naughty nice,
Yep,
and like
yep.
you are gonna be fucked if you are not the nice one, if you are not pure, if you, and oh my God, enough with that.
Yeah.
Um, mm. My biggest takeaway from Carmen, I think, and it literally was like I just remember when she said like the phrase at the very top of the episode,
Yeah, you have to
and
believe the lie because you can't fathom that they would tell a lie that big.
yeah, it just really that just kind of blew my mind because just
Same.
really thinking in terms of so many stories where like the story, like the pivotal moment of the story is like the protagonist realizing that like there's this big lie, like that they thought
Mm.
they were on this good side. They thought that this bad person, like they're coming in hot with those like fundamentalist, right, wrong, in group, out group. And then it's, at least these are like the stories. And I guess this relates to subversive smut, which I talked about with in episode 4 with my friend Burju. Because there is like this like subversive, and I'm currently reading my third like series of like subversive smut, and
Nice.
it just seems like that is like almost a trope, but I can't get enough of it, of this like of needing to come to terms with like, oh, this thing I thought I knew I actually didn't know, and these people that
Mm.
I thought were bad are actually now like the most like conscious, maybe the most liberated. They're the ones that I like need to be co-conspirators with or whatever. And um and like that's just radical as fuck. And so I just like, and so it's just like, okay, like can we just look around and be like, what are the big lies? And it's funny because it's like every, like regardless of your political beliefs, people can say like, so where I identify as very radical. So like there is
Hmm.
no political party that I would say like that I would believe is not lying to me. Like there's
Right.
no established political party that I am going to just be like, yep, this is good. Like, because there's just like so many systemic things. Like, but all I'm saying is like, I don't care like who you voted for. Like you were being lied to by the person you voted for. There, I said it. I feel like it does feel depressing, but it does feel worthwhile. And I think for me, it's just like, okay, again, like I like the fundamentalist. I don't want to have a fundamentalist like reaction to Trump's voters. Like
Right.
I don't want to say they're the like we disagree on our like we definitely disagree on values. I will say that I did not vote for Trump. I would fucking never like vote.
Yeah.
Like it's like his because his lies are pretty fucking blatant. Like it's like
Yeah.
and it is absolutely like punching down. It is absolutely like it is a fox in the henhouse. It's like we like you guys see that you are voting for like a billionaire with all these billionaire interests and like anyway, it's just like you like it is so like just like archetypally like villainous that it's like
Yeah.
it's absurd.
Yes.
There you have it.
Yes.
Um, so
I
anyway,
think it's kind of like the
yeah, have a
struggle of
stretch.
our yes, bring on the arms and legs.
Brings on the arms and legs, folks.
I was just gonna say it's just such a like primary struggle of our time to like um to be able to stand for what's important and like cannot emphasize enough how important it is that we don't like accommodate fascism in like trying to um hear other people's perspectives and like
Right.
and not act fundamentalist towards the people who we disagree with, right? But yeah, it's like it's just it is I think just hard to find that line
Mm-hmm.
when the stakes are so high or feel so high.
Right. Increase my capacity to sit in the discomfort of
Yeah.
offering like compassion and patience to people who like are willing to be curious and go there with me,
Yeah.
but like to also just like I'm not gonna waste my time either. Like
Yeah.
have the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes.
And mostly it's just like, okay, like I'm just gonna be my most secure self. I'm just gonna tell things very much the way I see it and from what I've learned. And anyway. So yeah, thanks, Carmen, for all of that. Um, so as I'm looking back on this season, because like going into it, not really knowing where I was going, um, and uh, it's funny. I've been thinking a lot lately of like Miss Cobell and her like a handshake is available upon request. A hug is available, or even like Miss Casey, a hug is available upon request. Um, and let's see, episode 2 of this season was like this really disorganized conversation, like this, like Kevin and my kind of forever fight that we have,
Mhm.
which kind of, but it was really around the theme of like making requests. But yeah, it felt meaningful to take my relationship in a place where I think like this season, like this like Severance season, and I did really feel like my marriage was it was coming for my marriage, especially considering that season 1, episode 1 was secure attachment and the male gaze in Little Women.
Mhm.
Like it felt like there was just this idea of like what does it look like for me to actually um, be my secure self and tolerate like the possibility that like my my partner may not like the person that I'm becoming because uh, it, feeling like there's these like old shapes. So it kind of feels like it felt like there was maybe not like an innie and an outie, but like a, like an earlier version of myself and like a later version,
Yeah.
and wanting to like rewire some of those things, but it's really hard when you have like just the habits of certain things. And so it felt really meaningful to not just do some of like the rituals and have some of the conversations that Kevin and I were having, but it actually felt doubly important that we got to a point where like he was willing to actually sit down and record a conversation with me and put it out there. It's like, it's like every time I press publish, I feel a little bit more free. And there was something
Mhm.
especially about that episode with Kevin that I feel like I just feel a little bit more free, because now any other episode that I talk about, I can just be like, oh yeah, like in my marriage, like there is this thing, like there is this like forever fight. And it's like, if you want to know, if you want to like go there, if you want to hear like a really tough conversation that I had with my partner, like it's there. There's probably some version of it that we're going to do every so often. We haven't had
Yeah.
another one quite like that. I think, yeah, just before I pressed record here, because I started reading a new book. I started reading a new book of subversive smut,
Mhm.
and it was last night, and I like did not get very much sleep last night because I
Mhm.
was up late reading, and then I like had trouble sleeping because it's kind of anyway, so I told Kevin, I was like, I didn't get very good sleep. I'm gonna record with Jamie, and I might need a nap later. And like, and then he was like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I like, I felt myself feeling ashamed
Mhm.
that I stayed up too late reading a book. And of all books that I was staying up to read, it was subversive smutty. And but I was like, okay, you know what, Kevin, for the sake of secure attachment, I just want to say that I'm feeling kind of ashamed, but I do want to share that like I was up really late reading this book, and and I was like, it was a little bit scarier than some of the other ones I've read. And it's not that I was like, it's not that I was terrified and like couldn't fall asleep, but it was like, but it's like my nervous system is not able to like that was a mistake for me to download that book last night. I could have done it earlier in the day. Um, because I shared to him, I was like, it feels really cool that I was like, in my head, like me staying up late, like reading this book, I'm like doing something like I feel like I would like that was like not a thing I was like allowed to do. It's like I don't want to argue the facts of like was I what like but
Yes.
so yeah, like there's just something that feels like really forbidden about just like this like I just want when I'm really into a book, I want to just like, really read it. I don't want to get interrupted.
Yeah.
And so, and like late at night, especially when you have kids, like late at night is just like a really easy time for that to happen. And so I like shared with Kevin. I was like, man, I felt really like ashamed to share this with you, but I'm really glad that you're not like, wow, Kristyn, like, thanks for being like a half-ass co-parent today. Wah, wah, or like say something
Yeah.
judgy. And he's like, no, like, I love that you have something that you love that much. He's like,
Yeah.
it brings me joy. I feel delighted that you have this thing that you're enjoying. And then he was like, I mean, because 3 or 4 years ago, like before I quit my job, like I remember, I mean, it was kind of a dark time, but like I
Mhm.
remember like he had hobbies and he had things that he would do. And, I don't know if it's like like kind of like, postpartum, like mom of young
Yeah.
kids or whatever. But I remember just being like, I used to have hobbies and I don't even know what my hobbies are anymore. Like I want to,
Yeah.
like, I remember being like, I want to do stuff, but I don't even
Yeah.
know what I want to do. And he was like, man, and I had kind of forgotten that that was like a season of our marriage.
Yeah.
Um, and he's like, oh my God, I would much rather you just like every so often just like not sleep because you're just really enjoying a book you're reading.
Yeah.
And I'm making sourdough, like what I've got a podcast. Um, and so I don't know, like it feels cool that like I know when we were recording our last episode, like if we're bookending it, it's like Kevin and I were in the midst of recording that like pretty deep,
Mhm.
pretty like
Yeah.
my marriage was a little tense um 2 months ago, and it does feel a lot. like the freedom that came with publishing that it's like I don't have to like I don't have to be like embarrassed or ashamed that it's like hard to ask for things in a marriage, that we like become different people, that
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the subversive smut. I'm trying to think of like what my I mean, I think I kind of shared like a big overlap, I think, with the subversive smut is, well, honestly, I think it's a little bit of like what I'm dreaming of for Helly's character, because I
Mm.
feel like Helly has a little bit of, she's got a really big lie moment
Yeah.
where, and there's, I don't want to spoil any particular books necessarily. So there are some smutty books out there that are very much like the protagonist is on one side, and then there's this big lie moment, and then it's just like, oh my gosh, everything I thought I knew is actually different.
Mm.
Um and I just think that that's really huge. I want to do I want to spend more time with that genre. It's a very pleasurable thing. It's a very I have a feeling like that's the next season on the horizon for me, is, or at least something that's inviting in more stories of romance, and whether we fit Love Island into that or not, I guess I don't know. But
Yeah.
uh, and then oh, and then my episode with John, which is airing
Yes.
today. I know you haven't even had a chance to listen to it because it like
No.
just came out, but one thing that I really loved that he brought up that I don't think I remembered, or if I did, it like it didn't quite register. Um, but he brought up that I've just been percolating on for a while is Burt and Irv's relationship, and how Burt
Okay.
like when they're taught, because you know, like they're bonding over the handbook and propaganda, like the Lumen propaganda, and Burt
Yeah.
says something to Irv where he's like, I'm more of a first edition kind of guy.
Mm.
And then he also says something like, you know, Kier can communicate to us in a variety of ways. You know, that it's like it's not just through, you know, the paintings, or not just through the handbook, but maybe it's through the paintings, or like, and it was just
Sure.
like I don't, I would have to rewatch the actual like bit to see like what more is said, but just the idea that there is this like original version that is
Mm.
somehow a little bit more intuitive, let's say. That's like maybe a little
Oh.
bit truer. And that brought me to that I am rereading, probably a little bit because of the subversive smut, but also because I want to have Sophie Strand on the podcast. I'm rereading The Madonna Secret, which is
Mm.
the novel of Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, or the historical Jesus's romance, because historians um, like agree that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were married, and so it's this novel that is that's really beautiful. It's really based in like I think Sophie does an amazing job of researching like the ecology of what Palestine and like what that area was like
Yeah.
in those years, and like fucking knows her shit as far as like, you know, what were the customs, or what were the traditions, what were the foods, what were that, like all of
Yeah.
that. And then she just like writes this just amazing uh novel of this like magician, mystic, wild uh couple, and this romance, and all she wants to do, you know, you know, she wants to go back to the river. She just wants to like live in the forest with him. That's like where they originally kind of like fell in. Anyway, there's I could go on about the Madonna Secret, but to me there's like I was like, oh, that's like a bright, like there is this, I, you know, I identified as an evangelical Christian when I was in my teen years. And I remember when I first read The Madonna Secret, there was just like it felt like a homecoming in a way. It felt like, oh my
Mm.
God, like I didn't waste my time with this
Mm.
Jesus guy. Like there were like those
Yeah.
years that like I let what other people, and like for good reason, good discernment, like the Christian church has done and continues to do a lot of things I just do not agree with. I don't know that I can I don't know what it would take for me to identify myself as a Christian
Yeah.
and also like the archetype of Jesus or like and let's be clear that like, there, if you restore or restory the story of Jesus, like there's a lot of Dionysian qualities about him that again, Sophie Strand talks about. And I'm really excited to have Sophie Strand on the podcast. But yeah, it's just like this invitation for me of like, okay, there was this archetype, there was this competent protector, there was this, um, you know, let's say 17th edition Jesus that I kind of like dallied with. And then I was just like, oh, the 17th edition Jesus, I'm not a fan of. But then
Yeah.
like through a lot of Sophie Strand's work, I'm like, oh, there's like a first generation. And there's also like Jesus can communicate to us in other ways. And
Yeah.
the closest, I mean, I would say in like my more numinous experience and more numinous mystical religious experiences that I had, when I was a teen, it was probably like when we were, I mean, and you and I like did Bible camps and stuff together. It was probably when we were in nature on at some camp. There was probably music, right? Like there
Yeah.
were like awe-provoking things in the nature and in the music. And like I'm doing that again with the podcast, and that there is to me very much a similar quality, maybe not the same, but that like cannabis being a guide in a way, like being to me, yeah, similar to like a Jesus, like a figure that
Sure.
I can um like resource myself with and be in community with and be in conversation, like literal, like yeah, like I can think about how I interact with my cannabis practice, and it's like, oh, it's very similar to like if I would do like a Bible study with Bible, like if I would like read my Bible, like light a candle, read a Bible, like there were like very quote unquote witchy things that I did when I was a Christian that then like I stopped doing because I wanted to separate myself from the propaganda, but that there's this invitation to
Yeah.
this like first edition, they can communicate to us in other ways, that I was just like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And like that felt like such a big connection for me. I mean, John and I talked about lots of other great things, which
Yeah.
I'm, but like that's definitely the one that I've been percolating with the most, as I've just
Yeah.
been like, yes, that's what I'm doing.
As you're talking about that, when you first were mentioned, like the idea of an original edition or first edition or whatever, it actually reminded me of, I wasn't sure which direction you were going to go with this because I haven't listened to the pod, but like I actually, to bring it back to fundamentalism for a moment, like I actually feel like fundamentalism is often about like looking back to this like kind of original first edition.
Mm,
And so I'm just thinking in my mind about like how do we differentiate the first edition that you're talking about, I think, which is like the original like seed of the idea and like the good form of it that then is like later co-opted by power and patriarchy. And then like I sort of think that's like the fundamentalists maybe think that they're like
true.
referencing
There's
the
like
first
multiple first
edition
editions.
when in actuality like they're referencing the 17th edition, as you said. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's kind of just what came up for me. But I love the idea of yeah, like the Jesus story, like there's a reason it resonated for so many people, when
Right.
Christianity began. Like there is so much goodness there.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and like the story is like is such a it's such a compelling one, right?
Yeah,
Um, like to die. I mean, it's like it's a martyr, like
yeah,
you're dying for your cause. You are. I mean, oh my God, that's the other thing. Like literally the week of our subversive smut, back to that, it was when all of the stuff with Luigi, the insurance CEO assassin, and
Yes.
like you like see these memes where it's
Alleged.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yes, the alleged, yes. But like all the like there's so many like Save Luigi, Saint Luigi memes and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and literally like people are making all the connecting him with like Jesus, which I mean,
Yeah.
that's a little much, but
Yeah.
also not a stretch when you think that like, he was assassinated by like the government, right? And we know
Yeah.
that like, or I've heard that anyway, like Luigi's like looking to get or that like they've been trying to get the death penalty or whatever for him. And I was like, oh well,
Yeah.
like I guess I mean like in that way there's a parallel, and certainly a parallel I would say to a lot of the love interests of the subversive smut, where I
Oh,
think God, I need to spend more time with the subversive smut because I can't help but stay up until 2 a.m. reading it. So like it
yes.
just seems like that is where that like there is just a pile of breadcrumbs spelling out smut, and that is where we're headed. Um, yeah, I think just to bring it back, it just feels really good to have someone that I can penguin pebble with on stories that we can just, I mean, over the last couple months, we've spent probably a couple hours like rehashing, not even like intentionally rehashing Severance, but just like making connections about things that are going on in our lives and being like, oh my God, it's like in Severance when da 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 da.
Yeah.
And um it feels it feels really cool that in this that like that for me this season was about um like the story plus the human experience. I think that that's actually, which I should have started with you. I re-listened to our episode that we
Mm.
did, and one of the things that I think you said, like the quote I really loved from you is like, we all like sitting around a golden orb and
Yeah.
listening to stories. So, excuse me for living, I like TV.
Yeah.
And that it is like, that there's these stories and there's also this like human connection. And I do like, if I think that for, millennia, we like to sit around the fire and listen to stories. And what is it that we're kind of missing out on if, we're just all sitting on our own couches, streaming whatever it is. And it's like, can we
Mm.
bring that connection in? And I think for me, um, when I'm thinking like, what is actually like the point of my podcast? Like, what is the Stoner Story Witch about? Like, I'm still kind of trying to figure it out. And I really think that it is like the power of stories to help us see some part of ourselves back at us.
Mm.
And or like to just like be entering into those conversations and being like, oh, okay, like we're just going to like let this story be a metaphor for us in these ways, and then be like, okay, like, well, so like, can I just like, what would it look like for me to just get the courage and ask Miss Cobell for this thing? Okay, well, I can
Yeah.
ask my boss for this, or like, okay, like I want to be really vocal about this thing, but I have to overcome this like fear of abandonment in my partner. And like, it's maybe not quite Helly and her dad, like just tracking that like a lot of cool stuff has happened, a lot of cool conversations have happened, and like it's thanks to this story. And I've started getting trickles in from people, randomly here and there, which is amazing. Like, oh my gosh, nothing makes my day more than when somebody reaches out to me to say, oh, I just listened to this part. It just feels like there are these conversations that I get to have that I just really, really want to have, that it's really hard to find people in real life to have them
Yeah.
because intimacy is hard.
Yeah.
And I am just really proud of us that we've done the work to get to where we are, where you've come on my podcast now, not once, but twice to talk
Whoa.
about Severance and sit with me in the season. So At this point, I think I'm still talking because it's going to be hard for me to say goodbye.
It was nice to just have sort of a casual conversation, and I mean, I'm just very much looking forward to season 2 of Severance to see what comes.
It is my hope that the resistance themes continue and that it is resourcing the collective for liberation, for what the next 4 years especially are going to require. I mean, not just 4 years, but I mean, man, January is going to be a hard month.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I have a feeling Severance will be very, very relevant when it comes out in mid-January. So
yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show, and
thanks for having me.
I look forward to that Love Island chat, and anytime you want to read some subversive smut, I'd love to have you on and chat about that too. So thanks for...
Yep, they're on my list.
Thanks for being a story friend.
Indeed.
I want to thank Matt Shuby for the podcast art, my husband Kevin Carlo for all his help in the creation of the theme song for the podcast, and Anais Mitchell and John Williams for their inspiration of Hedwig's theme and Hadestown. And before I sign off, I would like to leave you with a quote from another one of my teachers, Rev. Angel Kyoto Williams, who says, "Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters."